Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here today to talk to you all about the future of hardware. Now, before I get into that, I just want to give you a little bit of background on myself and why I care so much about and why I'm here to talk to you about hardware today. My name's Katherine, and I started a company called ShopLocket. And ShopLocket really started out as an e-commerce platform, but very quickly found that we were serving hardware entrepreneurs coming off of Kickstarter, coming off of Indiegogo, really specializing in these early stage hardware companies that would come to us at ShopLocket, and when they came here, they were still in pre-orders, they hadn't manufactured anything yet, and they'd come to us with all of their questions about how do I manufacture, I have $100,000 in orders, but I don't know how to make this yet, what do I do? And we would get all of these questions, and we'd go out there and we'd do research, we'd talk to different hardware entrepreneurs to try to be more knowledgeable in the space and be better at helping the entrepreneurs that were selling on the ShopLocket platform. And what we did in doing that is we actually ended up launching a series about a year ago called Blueprint. And Blueprint was an interview every week with founders of companies like Mayo and Dropcam, really capturing their stories of how they started from the very early stages to where they are today. And we published those online, put them out as free resources, and actually just 2 weeks ago spun Blueprint out as its own site, theblueprint.com, where you can go and find some of these resources and actually buy some of these cool products that we've had a chance to talk to. So these are the faces of a number of those entrepreneurs that I've had a chance to work with or talk to over the course of the last couple years. And I just want to start off by taking you through a couple of their stories to give you some context as to what's happening in the world of hardware today. First off, you might have heard of this company. It's a Canadian company called Interaxon. Their first product is called Muse, and it's a brain-sensing headband. And this company has gone on to raise over $6 million. They did almost $300,000 in their first Indiegogo campaign. And their first advice to anyone that's getting started in this space is to not underestimate manufacturing and how long that process can take. I ordered a Muse, and my Muse hasn't shipped quite yet. I think it's been about a year and a half. So amazing team, amazing founders, but really learned not to underestimate the difficulty in getting something from prototype into product in a customer's hand. Now, this is another company that I've had the pleasure of working with called Nomiku. They went through one of the first hardware accelerators, so similar to Founder Fuel or Y Combinator, but focused entirely on hardware. It's called Hackcelerator. It's in Shenzhen, China. And they take companies there for 3 months to work with contract manufacturers, work on their products, and Nomiku was in the very first cohort of that program. And Lisa really said that the thing that keeps you going when you're doing a hardware startup or any type of startup is just the passion you have for your idea and for each other, because that's what's really going to get you through the hard times. This is another company, also Canadian. It's nimble, based out of Toronto. They've had an incredibly successful pre-order launch, but are sort of part of this new wave of pre-orders that people do on their own website. So people that have decided that they want to build up their own SEO, they want to have more control over their marketing, and they've decided to actually run outside of the Kickstarter or Indiegogo ecosystems. Nimmy's gone on to raise funding. They are growing incredibly quickly. I think every time I see them, their team has doubled. But again, facing some of those challenges in the side of actually manufacturing, getting the product out quickly and as quickly as their backers expect them to. Just a couple more examples. I love Aya. She's the founder of Little Bits, and they're really revolutionizing electronical design, or electronics design and really education. It's an incredible product. It lets kids or anyone put together different circuits in fun ways, and they've been growing incredibly quickly. They manufacture actually with PCH in Shenzhen, and really learning a lot from Aya. She says that really not to rush as much as a lot of people do. She took 4 years in starting her company. A lot of people think they can launch on Indiegogo now and ship before Christmas. And so she really found that one of the key things to their success was taking their time and making sure that they were actually checking all the boxes before moving on to the next step. And finally, this is one of my favorites. This is Lumo Body Tech. And what Lumo Body Tech does is they basically track your posture. So if you're one of those people that sits at a computer all day, you probably have pretty bad posture. But what they did is their first product was something that wrapped around your waist and it would buzz anytime that you had bad posture. And they launched it on Kickstarter. They had a great success. But they realized after they got it into people's hands that it was a little bit cumbersome. It wasn't particularly fashionable. It didn't work that well under all types of clothing. And they came out with a new product just this year that they launched again on their own website over a crowdfunding platform, which is sort of interesting to see the different decisions people are making. And it's a pin that goes on your shirt, on your collar, and now it uses this beautiful designed pin instead of this really cumbersome thing around your waist to track your posture. So an incredibly interesting evolution. And she says that she believes that wearable tech is actually going to become wearable in the future, and that's her look onto the future. So in all of this is just a snapshot of a few people that have had the pleasure of interviewing or working with at ShopLocket. But we've done over 70 interviews. We've indexed the best articles that people have written, whether it's experts on hardware or Kickstarter putting together amazing guides. We have about 200 articles and everything from prototyping to manufacturing that you can read off of the blueprint. We also have a list of all the startups that we know that are active right now. We have a list of about 1,600 hardware startups. We also have a list of about 108 tools built specifically for hardware, and a list of all the active makerspaces around the world. So we're really trying to create these resources for the next generation. And my company, ShopLocket, ended up getting acquired by a company called PCH, and we put together a Launch Academy, which is an 82-page guide on everything you need to go through the first stages of launching your company. And it's been an incredible guide to give as a resource to places like Highway 1 or Bolt or Dragon, which are accelerators and investors focusing exclusively on hardware to create this framework for the next generation of companies going through hardware. So if you're starting a hardware company, talk to me about this guide. It's a free download on our website, and we're trying to always add more resources to it. So talk to me about that. And some interesting things that we found is that there genuinely is a framework for success in crowdfunding and in early stage hardware launches. It's things like the fact that you need to raise 35% of your goal on day one of a crowdfunding campaign in order to guarantee success. A lot of people will come to me 4 days in, 5 days in, we raised $5,000 of a $100,000 goal. What do we do to reinvigorate this campaign? And the truth is you should take it down. Something went wrong. You need to go back to the drawing board, do customer discovery, figure out the market you're going after, and realize that it's the momentum of a campaign, the success begets success, that you really need to focus on when launching one of these companies. Other interesting stats from all these interviews were that campaigns that actually have day-to-day marketing end up being way more successful than the people that rely on the one TechCrunch article at the beginning to get them through it. So if you're planning on launching, you should really make sure that you have a day-to-day marketing campaign. We've also noticed that people that send updates every 48 hours will raise twice as much as people that don't send updates or send fewer updates. This is counterintuitive, especially to a group of people like this that probably hates receiving email, gets too much email, and doesn't understand, this massive email that people are sending. But your backers want to hear from you. It's how they'll re-engage, it's how they'll share, and these metrics are very clear that the more updates you send, the more money you end up raising. And just a couple more stats here. We noticed that companies that have teams, so more than one person, raise 38% more than people that are just launching on their own. This just goes to show how hard it is to run a successful crowdfunding campaign or successful hardware launch. You need more hands on deck, whether it's things like support or day-to-day marketing. Having more people really helps. So, as I mentioned, we recently joined with this much larger company. They, a billion-dollar company that is manufacturing for Apple, for Beats, for all of these huge people in China. It's actually an Irish company, but they recently take a huge interest in startups. So we do startup manufacturing now, where you can get the Apple level production, but for a small company. And that's been a fascinating process for me to see how you can actually manufacture startup products on a relatively small scale in the same ways that you would have done million unit runs. And we also have an accelerator called Highway 1, which I've been able to work with. I think we're at about 30 companies that have gone through it, and these are the earliest stages of hardware companies figuring out their markets, doing their first prototype, and really realizing the journey that those companies go through. And in doing all of this, really, I just wanted to, before really jumping into what my predictions are for where I think future of hardware is going, just wanted to talk about where, from my experiences, I see hardware being today and what it's like to be a founder starting a hardware company today. So just to get started, there's a lot of things that have changed. The pieces to lower production cycles and the cost of production are finally there. You have tools like Upverter, you have the Arduino, you have an iPhone, which is basically a computer in every customer's pocket, so you don't need to build that yourself. All of these things have finally made it possible for hardware founders to start their ideas much more quickly and lower the cost of production. We've also noticed that it's no longer just the big guys. Whereas it used to be 2 or 3 or 4 year production cycles and design cycles to get out new products, you're seeing that there's companies like Quirky that are getting out a product a week, or companies like Whistle or Agent that are able to get out products on rapid basis. And it's not just that you wait for Apple or GE or Dell to get out the next product, and that's the only way that customers get product in their hands. There's now a rapid development of products in the space. And there's been amazing development in terms of accelerators. I mentioned a few of them, but this is another handful of, I think we're at about probably a couple dozen hardware-specific accelerators that have started emerging around the world, which is amazing to see. And of course, funding. There's things like Kickstarter, there's probably 200 crowdfunding sites that you could use right now, but there's also things like AngelList that have emerged that have changed the world for software startups, but also for hardware, and hardware-specific investors like Bolt that have started to emerge. So all of these things together have made it that hardware startups have a shot, where they didn't, or very much fewer had a shot 10 years ago. So what's the typical journey? Entrepreneurs generally rush in to starting their businesses. This is really the glamour of the pebbles, the glamour of a TechCrunch article, the amount that people talk about Kickstarter and crowdfunding and how easy it must be. People are rushing in to starting their businesses. And we're also seeing that we tell a lot of fairy tale stories about how these companies are overnight successes, how they have $10 million on their first 30 days or $3 million in their first 2 months. But we don't hear what happens after that first month or after those 2 months of sales. And it's really, we've noticed it takes about 6 months to 2 years to match your first month of sales in hardware. So those fairy tales that we hear generally aren't the full story, and they're usually a very small segment of the market. And we've also noticed that most people, and this goes for software as well, but it's honestly a lot more detrimental in hardware, is a lot of people can't answer the question, who are you designing for? Why do they need it? What problem are you solving? A lot of people are really just designing for their friends, designing for themselves, or they have this thing in their head that they think that unless they are able to put it in front of someone, then no one's going to be able to give them honest feedback. But it just comes back to honest customer discovery. Talk to the people you think you're building for. Learn about their lives. Learn about their problems, rather than pitching people on this thing that eventually they'll probably say they need because they want you to stop talking to them. So I think this is a problem for a lot of hardware startups. And you think about it, hardware startups maybe have 2 shots if they're lucky and have enough runway. Most of the time they only have 1 shot to get it right. This is different to software, where you can get it totally wrong the first time, and maybe a month later you can rebuild, reiterate, push something new every single day and test. Hardware, you have a product, it's going to ship, you go through 6 months of manufacturing. If you didn't get that right, your company is probably going to die. So you have to take customer discovery much more seriously. We've also noticed that a lot of people start projects and not companies. They're really excited about the press, about getting this idea out, by having people, do their first shipment. That's kind of exciting to people. But what they don't realize is that in order to be successful, you have to think about it a lot more like a business. What it's really going to look like is packing boxes at 2 a.m., soldering a board over and over and over again until it finally works, and pouring through receipts with your accountant. A lot of people think they'll be doing design, they'll be visionaries, but really 10% of what you're doing is actually design. And then you spend the rest of your time managing production, maybe sending samples to magazines, dealing with suppliers, begging TechCrunch or the Apple Store to actually carry your product, managing employees and hoping that they don't fail and that your company doesn't fail, and trying to eat and breathe in between doing all of that. So this is what the typical journey of a hardware startup actually looks like. And then they discover that once they have a prototype, it's actually incredibly complex to reproduce that prototype, even at a super, super small scale. And then they also find that quickly they have customers and suppliers scattered over the entire world, something that they probably thought, oh, I can build this myself or build it in my backyard, but quickly find that that changes. And they realize, like I was saying, that it takes them 6 months to 2 years to match their first month's sales. So all of these things happen very, very quickly for hardware startups, and this is the typical journey that they go through. And then they eventually realize, a lot of people think, okay, I'm just going to launch this on my website, and that's the best channel because I don't want to give up margin to stores. But then they realize that their sales on their website have tanked. They need to look at retail. They need to look at traditional distribution models, but they've priced their product way too low to be able to add a 50% margin on retail, and they have to go back and either try to redo their entire cost of goods sold, or they have to take quite a bit of a hit or really shock the marketplace when they double the price of the product. So these are things you need to start thinking about earlier and earlier. And on top of that, of course, you need to build a real business that makes money and somehow pays back you, and if you have investors, your investors as well. And I say wait, because one thing I want to point out is I've talked all about this and all about hardware and the problems that hardware has, but would you believe it that I actually got everything I just said from an article on the business of fashion? And all I did was replace crowdfunding and connected devices with fashion with crowdfunding connected devices. I talked about Stanford and MIT and those success stories. Just replace that with Saint Martin or Parsons. Replace soldering boards with steaming clothes at 2 in the morning. Or replace TechCrunch and Apple Retail with Anna Wintour or Nordstrom, and you basically have the fashion industry. And this has been something that's really fascinated me over the course of the last few months. You know, we talk about hardware as this new thing that has all of these problems, and we have all these emerging hardware startups that are going through all of these sourcing issues and rapid product development. But it's really the parallels to an age-old industry of fashion are massive. And really, because we've had, you know, oh, and also Kickstarter. It's replaced with Kickstarter, also in fashion. But what we have, and the reason that these two are finally converging, is because of all the things I mentioned earlier. It's because we no longer just have the big guys. It's because the pieces of production finally exist. And the way that you can find fabric and thread, you can now find all of the pieces to creating a hardware device. And we now have shorter production cycles, so you can iterate like people iterate in fashion. And we have access to early stage funding and early customers like a lot of businesses in fashion also have. And all of these similarities have really made me think, if these two are starting to converge, what else can we learn from this age-old fashion industry to make predictions on where hardware might be going? And these are a few of my predictions. I think we will see the emergence of seasons in hardware. The idea that, you know, every fall and every spring you have to have an entire new fashion line because the appetite for consumers is changing so quickly, because you can, because production is easy, or easier. I think that mentality in the fashion world is going to cross over into the hardware world. We've already seen things like this with Apple hiring the CEO of Burberry. You can only expect what that might mean for both Apple retail and Apple's merchandising catalog. And I think that we also see in crowdfunding, there's people that have already done 2 or 3 crowdfunding campaigns for their company. And they're doing them every 6 months, every year, every time they have a new product, or every time they have a new product design. And even that is the start of this very seasonal approach to hardware, which is incredibly fascinating. I also think that we might see the development of retail channels that are a lot more startup friendly. You'll go into a department store, and have you ever seen one of those emerging fashion designer sections where fashion designers can get their stuff into the store for a week or a month and they sort of test it out to see if it works? What if we had that in Best Buy or Future Shop or on different major tech sites online. This ability for young hardware startups to get favorable terms, favorable margins so that they can actually get a foot in the door. I think we'll see some of that starting in hardware as well. And actually, PCH is doing some work in this area. There was just a partnership announced with Radio Shack where companies will be able to get their products in Radio Shack. Radio Shack has to commit to the orders. They can't get refunds on the product. It's incredibly favorable margins, and their new orders are placed every 3 months, I think, to keep the production cycles and the order cycles really short for startups and keep it to very low inventory for Radio Shack. And this is an attempt for Radio Shack to create an innovation hub within their store that only ever has new products that cycle in and out on a 3-month basis, the best of which will actually get a spot in Radio Shack. And I think more like this, whether it's Radio Shack or imagine going to the typical department store and finding some cool new tech products, I think we'll start seeing more of this. I also think that we're going to see a lot more competition and really the commoditization of a lot of the parts of building hardware, getting your board to work, getting Bluetooth, all of these things are getting easier and easier and easier. And what's going to start differentiating you from other people in your market is your brand, is your ability to connect with customers, your ability to understand distribution. And I think that's where we're going to see people differentiate themselves. There's already some examples of this, of course. Pebble is basically the Kleenex of smartwatches right now. A lot of people are getting into the space. I think I see a new smartwatch every couple days, but Pebble's been able to maintain this name brand that people associate with the smartwatch. Nest, this is an interesting one for me because I actually worked for a Toronto company that does smart thermostats, and they'd been doing smart thermostats for 3 years before Nest launched. No one had probably ever heard of this company. It was an iPhone-connected smart thermostat, exactly what Nest was trying to do, but Nest nailed branding, they nailed distribution, they nailed product design, and all of a sudden the world knew what smart thermostats was, even though they had already existed. And then I think Beats is a really interesting one. Really little to no technological innovation in this product, but the branding and the ability to mass market this and bring it to customers is what ended up separating this product. So I think there will always be innovations that are truly tech innovations. It's something new, it's something novel, and that's what differentiates your product. But for 95% of the ideas that I hear, they're fitting into this category. It's their brand, it's their market, it's their distribution that is going to make them succeed or fail. So this is another interesting one. You look at the fashion industry, you see things like Vogue. It brings the latest in fashion, the most cutting-edge products to consumers. This is very different to, say, a TechCrunch approach where it's basically insiders talking to insiders, and you go in there to find about funding news. What is the version of that that brings all of this in a truly accessible way, like, again, Vogue would do for fashion, to the average consumer? And this is really where a lot of my time and my thought goes into how do we take all of these incredible innovations happening now on Kickstarter, but then where in the world does the average person find them after Kickstarter? That's what we're trying to create, and that's what the blueprint really is meant to be. We've created this media site that talks about products, talks about founder stories, and shows a curated list of the best products in hardware. And this is the part of this puzzle that we really find ourselves trying to fill. And before I go on and take some questions, I just wanted to leave you with a few final thoughts. And those thoughts are, I'd highly recommend that if you plan to start a hardware company, go to San Francisco or go to China. I realize we're here and in Canada, and yes, there's great ecosystems here, but it's like being an actress and never going to Hollywood. Like, you need to go, you need to see the passion and the energy and the pace at which things are moving, both in China and in San Francisco. San Francisco, much more for ideation and design. China, because if you think you're going to create a hardware product and you've never seen an assembly line, and you've never seen a product getting made at a mass quantity, there's probably a problem in how you're thinking about your business. Go look at it. I was totally astonished by how manual everything is. The 30 people on the line just that you can package one thing into a box and put it through cellophane wrap. And it was just absolutely fascinating to see how much work went into every single process. And, of course, being a tech person, myself and my team were all like, okay, well, why don't you just create robots? Why can't this just, be done by machines? I don't understand why there are people sitting here. And they're like, the product design changes every 2 months. We're not going to build a new machine, redesign a new machine every 2 months. And what if something needs to change? Then we have to to build a new machine in a week. People are flexible, they move quickly, we can hire them, fire them, they're still pretty cheap. The machines aren't nearly as cheap. And I was like, oh, okay, I really assumed that all of this would have been automated by now. So it's things like that that I think are really fascinating. If you actually go and take a look, it's not that expensive, and it's very much worth your time if this is something you really plan to do. The next one, and I've added this actually, something I've started talking about recently, is do customer discovery. It is so important to you as a hardware company succeeding. There's a really funny story about this, actually. Lockatron, if you guys know it, it's a smart lock. They were one of the first interviews I did, and they have hilarious stories about customer discovery, because if you didn't know, Lockatron went through Y Combinator, and they started out with an idea for a pizza button. So it was an app that you'd like press it and a pizza would show up at your house. So it was really a drunk app. And they did all of these really weird tests with pizza stores and people going into pizza stores to make sure that this idea would actually work. It turned out that, well, the people in the pizza stores, when they got called for these automated numbers saying credit card numbers, were like totally freaked out. And that part of the business didn't work, so they couldn't get the pizzas delivered. And turned out that the customers didn't actually really want this. They downloaded it once and then didn't actually care to go back. But when you're doing customer discovery, it's like, how do you know you're building something people actually want? And when they went forward with Lockatron, they actually talked to a lot more people, understood how they went about their day-to-day lives, actually spent a lot of time with people that have Airbnb houses as a test market for Lockatron. So how do you, as an entrepreneur, know that there's a real problem that you're solving and that people are willing to pay money for it? There's some great resources on this. One that was introduced to me by Zach from Upverter was the mom test, which is awesome. It's basically, how do you get a test that's so good that your mom would answer it honestly, because moms like to say that things are awesome. But how do you have questions that even your mom would give the right answers, that you know if things were good or bad? There's a customer discovery blog, customer product dev, I think it is, but it's got amazing resources for how you write interview questions for customers. The Lean Startup has a great chapter on customer discovery, and also 4 steps to the Epiphany. So if you have any doubt about your market or your product, do this. It's actually, even if you think it's amazing, please do this. It's incredibly important. And then this is one that I watched this documentary on Netflix about 5 or 6 months ago. It's called Scatter My Ashes at Bergdorf's. It's a documentary about fashion, about all of these fashion designers trying to get their new products into Bergdorf's, which is basically the highest end department store in the world. It's a huge coup for someone to actually get their product into Bergdorf's. And it goes through the people at Bergdorf's looking at all the products and people that are applying, which ones they want to have, which ones they don't, which designers they want to invest in, which ones they don't want to invest in. The designers talking about, do I give Bergdorf's exclusivity or do I have to go through other retail channels? What margin do I want to set my product at? Who's my customer? If you look at this documentary and then pretend that all of these entrepreneurs were hardware entrepreneurs and that Bergdorf's was the Apple store, there's incredible learnings that come out of watching this documentary. It's available on Netflix in the States, so I'll let you guys figure out how you would actually get that. And I would recommend, they have a startup section to the blueprint that has all these resources and links to external blogs and our entire Launch Academy. So if you have any questions, please go to this resource, because a lot of what I talk about is found in our startup resource section. So that's all from me right now, and I'm happy to take any questions about this, because I think we might have a little bit more time. So.
Hi, I'm wondering if you've seen any trends in people modeling out the hardware experience and software, and why does the software experience for so many wearables still kind of underwhelm so much? Suck.
Yeah, well, I think it really depends on the team behind the product. I've seen a ton of terrible hardware products with beautiful websites and beautiful applications, but no one ever hears about it because the hardware is so terrible. And I think that's one of the interesting things about hardware, is that you kind of have to have a team that has all the pieces from day one. It has to have incredible hardware design. It has to have a great app, a great desktop experience. Then you also have to have business and marketing knowledge. And I've noticed, even just in our accelerators, the teams for hardware seem to be larger. So a lot of the it's about 3 or 4 founders. Well, 3 founders, I'd say, is usually what we see. But Ringly, which is a company that went through Highway 1, is already at 8 or 9 people, and they haven't even shipped a product. You look at the size of Interaxon. I think last time I looked, it was 20 people. It's probably more now. I think Nimi is somewhere up there as well, maybe even higher at 30 people. And those companies haven't even shipped product yet, which, I think we're going to get better at being leaner and being faster and doing these things with fewer people. But you need those intelligences on your team. And I think a lot of them are like, oh, hardware, we just need hardware people. And then the software is often this afterthought, oh, crap, we need something before we ship. Let's just have an MVP of an app. And it's just an afterthought. Cool. Yeah.
Thanks. We see Kickstarter kind of removing away from the hardware. We see more and more every week, more like design stuff and less hardware on Kickstarter, while Indiegogo is just going like crazy on it, but they don't deliver, they don't have success. So what would you recommend?
Yeah, so Kickstarter, interestingly enough, when I talked to them 6-7 months ago, they said tech and hardware was their biggest category last year. So as much as Kickstarter legally is very apprehensive about hardware, they like not calling themselves a store. They just don't want the liability of these things that may or may not ship. So they publicly distance themselves from hardware, and that's become very clear. They're not as active as Indiegogo in the hardware community. Indiegogo hired Kate Drain about 1.5 years ago to take over sort of their hardware outreach in San Francisco, and Kate has built a team now that's actually got 2 people here in Canada, Aya and Steve, that are reaching out to hardware companies, being super supportive, creating guides, helping them. So just Indiegogo's been incredibly good at the outreach side. And really just genuinely wanting to be there to help. And they get, the good and the bad. Canary went on Indiegogo. They had incredible success. Muse did a great job. So I don't think Kickstarter projects necessarily ship any better. Kickstarter lets in fewer, and I think that those ones, they tend to be higher quality then, and then they tend to ship. Indiegogo just lets in everyone. There's still great products that ship and products that don't. One thing that's interesting, I think that there's going to be a lot more checks that start getting exposed. So things like Dragon Innovation already has a check on Indiegogo that it's Dragon Innovation approved. So that probably is more manufacturable and a better product. So I think there's going to be more things like that where manufacturers and external people are going to review campaigns before they go up, so that consumers have more information to make their decisions as to whether they want to back it.